Hello, and welcome to another episode of Rational Actors on Blogging Heads. I'm Kevin Glass, Director of Policy at the Franklin Center, and today I'm joined by...
Ben Howe. I am the senior contributing editor at redstate.com, and I recently directed the film The Sociopath about the rise of Donald Trump.
Great film, by the way. I encourage everyone to go see it. Is there an easy site name that you can give for people to find it?
We crowdfunded for the film, and so if you go to gofundme.com/the sociopath, it's right there.
Yeah, and the sociopath in question is, of course, Donald J. Trump, the
Right.
president-elect of the United States.
Yes.
Great film. I think you made a really great case from a conservative perspective. Well, not just a conservative perspective, from a kind of sanity perspective, but as a conservative filmmaker, the failings in temperament and personality that Donald Trump displayed. And you yourself have kind of identified with the Never Trump movement, which largely consists of movement conservatives who have been active in conservative politics for a very long time, who, there was kind of a Never Trump phase of the primary, but then it continued once Donald Trump won the nomination, and I would say intensified for the conservatives who refused to get on board with the Republican nominee.
Absolutely.
Kind of tell me about your involvement in the movement, how you evolved in your thinking, why you weren't one of the Republicans that came home to Donald Trump after he won the nomination.
Well, it started, really it started for me all the way back in 2011 when he first started trying to shoehorn himself into Republican politics. There had been years of work being done by activists, organizations and on-the-ground grassroots people. The Tea Party had all been working towards getting a more conservative government installed. And here comes 2011, this guy who previously had expressed much more statist views in previous elections, comes along and starts saying that he's, one of us. And he does this by adopting one of the fringest views on the right, which was birtherism. And so when I watched this sort of cynical play by him, and I had already thought he was a showman, he was a showbiz guy, I just thought he was making a joke of us and he made us look bad. So I already despised him. But then in 2015, when he actually announced that he was going to run for president, it was a very slow process of starting out assuming, well, of course, everybody agrees he can't be president, to, of course, everybody agrees that even though there's some of us who have shifted in their thinking, they're doing that for the wrong reasons, and we can convince them. And then come the beginning of the year of 2016, when he was still leading in the polls, and you're watching a lot of politicians and a lot of pundits going from, I'm not sure what's going to happen, to, I hope Trump wins, it seemed like it was time to declare a more assertive opposition. So as to say, not, I don't like John Kasich, I hope he's not the nominee, more like, no, I can't be part of this if Donald Trump is the nominee. Over time, people confused that with, because you said a moment ago, these are a lot of movement conservatives. Now, if you asked a Trump supporter who was very involved in the election cycle, they would say, no, these aren't movement conservative. These are establishment hacks who are trying to keep their paychecks and so on and so forth. Because he, in addition to co-opting the fringe birther movement, he co-opted the anti-establishment movement. And the people who had actually been running it, like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and others, were suddenly deemed part of the establishment. So as I'm watching it all play out, I just think, look, this guy's not going to stop this cycle of co-opting and destroying movements. And eventually that movement is going to be the entire conservative movement. And so I felt like he needed to be stopped. Now, of course, obviously, he wasn't stopped. And it's been interesting trying to sort of figure out the best way to approach the situation since then.
Yeah, and I wanted to get into that, but I wanted to ask you, are you comfortable saying who you voted for in the presidential election
Mm-hmm.
and why. I've said kind of pretty publicly I voted for Hillary Clinton. A For all of the reasons that you just laid out about how Donald Trump is co-opting the conservative movement, and I thought that he would destroy it
Mm-hmm.
from the inside. I also thought, 100% legitimately, that Hillary Clinton would have made a better president of the United
Yeah.
States than Donald Trump would have made. I think that she has, on certain issues, instincts that are closer to the conservative movement than Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that a Republican Congress would work as a very good foil to her, and we would have, not to say that the Bill Clinton years were gangbusters for the conservative movement, but America endured. I thought there were some good compromises that came out of those years, and we would have something similar in a Clinton White House with a Republican Congress. I thought she would make a better president.
Sure.
Obviously, that's not the case now. Who did you vote for and why? I know kind of you were friendly to Evan McMullin,
Yes.
but also said straight up, I think, that you thought Hillary Clinton would also make a better president. So kind of I wanted to ask you who you voted for, why, and maybe how Evan McMullin fits into this equation.
Well, for me, very early on, when there was no Evan McMullin possibility, I had said that if Trump was the nominee, I'd vote for Hillary for some of the reasons you outlined. Basically, I believed we had two choices: a severely injured conservative movement or a dead conservative movement. And so I decided I'd rather have a severely injured conservative movement that could survive the presidency of Hillary Clinton. But in terms of things that she would do better, I don't think that she would do better than a standard Republican on domestic policy. And I don't think that she would do better than what Trump pretends he's going to do on domestic policy. The problem is,
Right.
I don't think he's going to do those things. And some of his domestic policies are worse than what she would have done. And the ones that I do like, I have no faith he'll do. So really it came down
Got a
to...
$1 trillion stimulus plan.
Right. Those are the things that will pass, But any kind of comprehensive immigration reform that I could get behind, that's not going to pass. Any kind of... I don't agree with the trade policies. I'm more into the idea of free trade, which is apparently unique. I don't know that would have been different under Hillary, but the big difference with Hillary would have been stable foreign policy. I can't say that I look at Hillary Clinton's foreign policy and get excited that she's going to bring a new understanding to the world about what America believes and how we should be treated. But I don't think she would take us too far from where we've been from the last 8 years with Obama. I haven't found Obama's foreign policy to be preferable either, but it's better than what I think is going to be a dumpster fire if Donald Trump can't be controlled. And I had to wrestle with all of those questions. Okay, it would be a dumpster fire if Donald Trump can't be controlled. Can he be controlled? Well, I watched and I sort of begged for the opportunity to believe that he could be, because that's what people kept telling me. They said, hey, you're not voting for Trump, you're voting for Pence. Or you're voting for this guy or that guy. He'll get all the really good guys because all he wants to do is win. And yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing, but he'll surround himself by people who do. And I kept saying, well, but what evidence is there that he listens to people that we would want him to listen to? Because so far, it seemed like the only people he really listened to were Vladimir Putin and Steve Bannon. And those aren't people that I'm particularly excited about him listening to. And the rest of them, the thing that turned the tide the most for him, everybody mentions the Comey investigation, the FBI investigation with Hillary. I think it's that they took his Twitter account away. I mean, they had to,
Right.
they couldn't even control what he said on Twitter, which to me basically meant you let this guy tell you what's in his heart and he loses. So how dangerous is that on the world stage? To me, it's terrifying. Now, in the end, what I decided was, because I live in South Carolina, and I had said from the beginning, I don't want to pull the lever for Hillary Clinton. It's really going to come down to how close it is. And if it was close in my state, I'm not going to be one of the reasons that it goes the way I don't want it to go. As you probably know, it ended up being kind of a complete blowout in South Carolina. It wasn't even close. If you took all of the independent players and added them to Hillary Clinton's total vote, it still wouldn't come out to what Donald Trump received. So I voted for Evan McMullin because it was nice to be able to vote for somebody who I agree with everything on.
Sure, yeah. So this is, I mean, up to now, what we've been talking about, we're kind of giving a wake to the Never Trump movement. But for people like you and me, who, and honestly, I think you and I are pretty far apart on, our amounts of conservatism and what we push for. But we're both people who were steadfastly anti-Trump, and we're part of the. I think exit polls showed Donald Trump got 90% of the. I don't know if you identify as a Republican. I'm a registered Republican. Donald Trump got 90% of the Republican vote, which is basically in line with what every Republican nominee gets. I think Romney got 92, McCain got 93, Clinton got 89 of the Democrats. So whatever merits of the Never Trump movement, we didn't really move the needle in any meaningful way.
No.
According to exit polls, and maybe all polling is suspect at this point in the wake of the election. But what do people like us do going forward? Because, it's kind of been hitting me like we can't just hide in a bunker and hope for the best.
No.
Donald Trump is going to be president of the United States. I hope so sincerely that you and I were very wrong about him, about his temperament, about his character, about his instincts, and that in the 4 or potentially 8 years of a Donald Trump administration, good things can be done.
Sure.
But what exactly does that mean, and what should we be doing or working for or building, come Inauguration Day?
Well, first, between now and Inauguration Day, I've resisted the temptation to get super duper excited about rumors. I've also resisted the temptation to assign the good conservative standing of somebody that's being considered for a cabinet position to Donald Trump. So if Mitt Romney is going to be considered for Secretary of State, Mitt Romney's record does not now automatically transfer to Trump. It's, Trump has to do his job well for me to feel like I wasn't correct in my analysis of him. I already know that Mitt Romney can do a competent job as Secretary of State. But if people are trying to tell me that the entirety of a presidency is selecting people that will do the job for you in such a way that the president himself is essentially irrelevant, I just don't believe that's true, and I don't think we've ever treated a president that way. But for me, post-Inauguration Day, I expect to be very similar to how I was in 2009. In 2009, with one difference. What Obama laid out as his plans were things I didn't want to happen. So his success was something I actually, in a sense, didn't want. But I did want the country to end up in a good place, whether or not we disagreed on certain things. And the same goes for Trump. But that doesn't mean that I can't be critical. And that doesn't mean that I can't basically be all over him the same way that I was Barack Obama. The way I've said it to some people is I intend to be a perpetually dissatisfied parent. Nothing's going to be good enough till he's gone. And then if he does a great job, sure, I'll pat him on the back when he's done. But this is something that this entire election cycle has taught me. What do I get out of giving the benefit of the doubt to politicians? What have I gotten for it? What have any of us gotten for it? Why do we continue to say that we must give these people some type or some level of optimistic confidence that assumes the best in them? Why can't we just be all over them and not worry about whether or not it hurts their little feelings that we can't seem to be made happy? I'm happy to be, the get off my lawn, ornery old man constantly complaining about Trump if it in some way affects stuff. Now, to your point, Never Trump didn't move the needle. First, I'll say I never expected it to move the needle necessarily. It was one of the big jokes. I mean, you've said it too, I'm sure. When people would get all over us, I would say, look, if Trump loses, Trump lost. I mean, I'm spelling out my position and I'm spelling out what I believe, but I'm under no illusions about who is making himself win or lose. And it was going to be Donald Trump. Now, in some respects, I was wrong because it turned out Hillary Clinton played a much larger role in the win or loss than I expected. But it certainly wasn't Never Trump that was the influence. The reason for Never Trump, at least for me, and some people define it differently, the reason for Never Trump is a question of if we truly believe that something awful is going to happen and have any form of a microphone with an audience that listens to that microphone, then I think we have an obligation to stand up for what we believe is right, regardless of consequence, regardless of impact, but for the sake of the credibility of people who are hoping to shape conservatism going forward.
Yeah, I think, and maybe you're actually getting me to kind of reconsider this on the fly. I think you make the best point is, we haven't seen anyone be able to truly moderate or control Donald Trump.
Right.
I thought that it was going to be a lot harder for us who were vehemently anti-Trump to stay anti-Trump because I believed in the general election pivot that never came.
Yeah.
I thought that was going to happen, and it didn't. And it became very clear that the people who tried to control Donald Trump got kicked out of the inner circle. And
That's right.
Specifically Paul Manafort, who tried to run the Trump campaign like a traditional campaign.
See, but I think Steve Bannon did that.
Out.
I think Steve Bannon kicked him out. That's what I think.
Well, that's entirely possible. But I believed in the pivot. I believed that I basically believed that Donald Trump was putting on an act before he won the nomination, and there would be a pivot. But that it's clear that was not the case, and that controlling him is impossible. So,
yes.
While I would be heartened by appointments to his administration that I thought were recognitions of people that could do some legitimate good, there's literally no track record there of that being possible with Donald Trump.
Well, so, but I can get very excited. I can get super excited about the Supreme Court nominee because the president will have zero control over that person. There's not going to be any coordination or anything. So if he nominates somebody that I can really love as a nominee, I'm going to have nothing but yes, that is awesome. And I'm happy to say, well done, Donald Trump,
I'm not sure. Donald Trump has no respect for the norms of our political institutions. No. So if he puts someone on the Supreme Court who turns out to not be a Donald Trump sycophant, I wouldn't put it past him to come up with an FDR-style court packing scheme to basically bully the Supreme Court into coming back around to his way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, that's kind of an apocalyptic view, but I certainly don't put it past him. It's a non-zero chance that happens. So, while yes, I acknowledge to the reluctant Trump supporters who waved the list of judges in front of all our faces for the last 6 months, that yes, that list of judges would represent people who, and I haven't delved super deep into those, but people that I would find acceptable and would probably make for good replacements for Justice Scalia on the court.
Sure.
I 100% do not put it past him to rip that up or to expect fealty of a Supreme Court nominee.
I have no, at this point, even when I tweeted, that it was good news to hear that so far the list remained. At the same time, there's been nothing that Donald Trump has done, nothing, that has given me any evidence that he cares what he promises and who he promises to. If, let's say, come January or, whenever he nominates someone, let's say he nominates someone new in February, or let's say he announces who it's going to be later this year, which I think there's a good chance he won't do that. But let's say he does. And everybody's upset. Let's say it's somebody that has 2 or 3 views that everybody's all super big about, but he pulls a George Bush and really only worries about abortion and doesn't worry about a bunch of other issues that people are going to be concerned about. I'm not picturing Donald Trump, Mr. I'm a winner, backing off of his very first major nomination to the Supreme Court. I picture him doubling down. And I picture a guy like Steve Bannon advising him, look, people are going to be mad at you, but the people who put you in this office are going to lose respect for you if you back down the way Bush did with Harriet Miers. Nobody ever respected Bush again after he did that, so on and so forth. I'm sure that's what he will say. And that's going to end up being a situation where they're going to be balancing Trump's legacy and his ability to accomplish goals against what's best for the Supreme Court. And I can't imagine Trump going, well, obviously we do what's best for the Supreme Court. He's going to do what's best for Donald Trump.
Right. And from a very pro-Kelo individual, I would expect if he gets the opportunity to appoint someone who would be a swing vote to overturn Kelo, that he might not necessarily do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, he's already been wrong, and he has not budged on eminent domain. He's already, like, his views on trade policies are horrible. His views on Second Amendment are questionable. His views on, I mean, there's so many issues that people could bring to the court if they think this is their shot, you know, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, the one thing that I think had to come to grips with, for all the kind of noise about the Never Trump movement being these establishment elite Republicans who have no connection to the heartland, I've found that mostly the reported trend that, you know, most Republicans turned out to be pro-Trump in the end to be true in D.C. and in D.C. circles. So I've had to start to come to grips with people that I like and respect joining a Trump administration. Before Trump won, I had basically written off everyone who had endorsed him. I thought it was a no-brainer to not endorse or unendorse or whatever, not support Donald Trump, that it would have no effect on anyone's future career. Obviously, that didn't turn out to be the case. So I've been kind of wrestling with, all the Republicans who endorsed him, you know, turned out to be, as far as the cynical career move, turned out to be right. And B, that a lot of people who are not politicians, you know, people in the activism world or in the think tank world, are considering joining a Trump administration, either in the White House or an executive agency. And I don't really know what to make of that, considering I had been holding out hope that I would not have to respect anyone who had worked with Donald Trump in the future. So I'm not sure where to go, and I think it's gonna have to be a little bit of white flag waving and saying, I was wrong, obviously, about the electoral prospects, but there are also all of these people who I think have the genuine good of the country at heart, who are not dumb, who are not, you know, sellouts to a bully authoritarian, who are going to be joining the administration. And I legitimately hope that they are able to join and do some good. I'm just not sure about the prospects of that.
Well, I think that, you know, in terms of the electoral map and what we were right or wrong about there, just as a brief aside, you only based that on every single bit of evidence there was. So I'll never feel that bad about siding with what everything was pointing towards, especially because prior to the polls moving in that direction to where he was just getting dominated by Hillary in the polls, I would say to people who you know, sort of trolled me on Twitter, you know, I can't believe you don't think Trump will win. And I was always like, why do you think I think Trump wouldn't win? I mean, I wouldn't this vehemently oppose him if I thought if there was no risk of him winning. He's shown over and over again that he can do that. But in terms of people who decide to join the administration, this is how I've viewed it. I'm continuing to view it as a pre-election scenario. So you take two examples, Mike Huckabee and Mitt Romney, okay? When the President of the United States asks you to serve your country, I think you do it. And agree with him or not. I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but it's almost like when Ned Stark was called to be the Hand of the King. He didn't want to go. His king called him, so he went. Um,
Or
I
the John Huntsman excuse for
Yeah, that's
accepting
right.
the ambassadorship to China.
Absolutely, and I think
I shouldn't
that,
say excuse. I think that's a perfectly legitimate justification.
well, and especially if you think you can do some good in the role.
Yeah,
If you can mitigate problems that you're already concerned might exist because of your views of Trump, well, then it makes total sense that you'd want to be involved in helping stop those problems. So for me, it still comes down to the people who lifted him up, who early on backed him and made excuses for his awful comments and helped ensure, number one, that he was the nominee, and then number two, that he became president. Now, I have a little bit more sympathy for people who decided towards the end that Hillary was worse than Trump. We all have to make our own decisions about who is more dangerous between the two. And if you're a reluctant Trump supporter who ultimately decided that he's better than Hillary, I totally respect that. It's the excited, red hat wearing, Trumpkins, which Huckabee is one. So whatever Huckabee position, they're talking about him for ambassador to Israel. Good luck in your job, and I hope you do well, but I never support your political political campaigns again. I'll never listen to your political opinions again. You may be able to do your job, but as far as I'm concerned, you're just another Hollywood cynic. Washington cynic looking to ride the coattails of whoever is going to give you the most coverage. You know as well as I do, it's not like going Never Trump was the glamorous thing to do. It's not like we did
right.
this and as a result, people were knocking down our doors with offers about what was going to happen after the election.
It's cocktail parties. Obviously,
right.
It's the cocktail parties.
That was basically all I did it for. But it was it was a decision about conscience, and with Huckabee and a lot of other people that I used to respect, they put their party before what they had previously claimed was bad for the country. Most of these guys said that Trump was an unstable, sociopathic liar, and then they turned around and said they were going to support him. I have a hard time dealing with that. But Romney never shifted. And he always said that's who he is. And he refused to back down. And so if he now takes this position, which he is rumored to have been offered, if he now chooses to take this position, I think that's fine. And I honestly, and I know that my detractors will just crack up at this, I think that's very noble.
So one thing on, I think, the reluctant Trump supporters, I know a bunch of them who were reluctant Trump supporters who were, I don't like Trump, I think that he's bad, but I am reluctantly pulling his lever so that Hillary Clinton does not become president.
Mm-hmm.
Out of those people, I don't see reluctance anymore.
No.
And I wonder if this is a phenomenon you've seen. I
Yes.
see gloating that we won, that I was that they were on the winning side,
Right.
that I was a reluctant supporter, but now I am so happy, I am enthusiastic about a Trump presidency.
Right.
And I wonder if you've seen anything differently. I would
No.
expect from a reluctant Trump supporter, both a sigh of relief and oh no, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're pulling the lever just to keep Hillary Clinton out of office, then you should go, all right, we did it. Now we got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
But no, everyone's like, yes.
Well, what's interesting,
Donald Trump won. Trump for president.
What's interesting is part of
And
my
I don't see the reluctance anywhere anymore.
part of my entire opposition to him was, yes, I thought all these things about his characters and his judgment and his stability. But it was also a question of, like I mentioned before, can he be controlled? And that wasn't just like the people right around him. It was, voters, people in Congress that he doesn't appoint that can just either support or oppose various parts of his agenda. And what's been proven, and people don't like to hear this, sure, Congress doesn't have a backbone when it comes to holding the line on various things, but neither do the voters. And neither do a lot of the pundits. Because what has happened, and I don't know if it's always been this way, I'm only 39, I can't say for certain how long it's been this way, But we have this team sport mentality. It's not the Democrats versus the Republicans. It's the Cowboys versus the Redskins. And they may not like various players or the coach or whatever, but once they win the Super Bowl, they're going to be running around pretending that was their team the whole time. And
Right.
I think that element is playing out and that it feels really good, but that it has long-term serious detrimental effects on government. And I think that's what's been proven. I touch on it a little bit in the film. We reached a point where we can't disagree on strategy without it meaning we disagree on belief. So, for instance, you and I could possibly agree 100% on an issue as controversial as abortion, but you may disagree on how the Republican Party should work on that issue. And what's happened over the years is somebody like me would take your difference in how you wanted to approach it as a testament to how committed you were as somebody being pro-life. And that has played out so hard, even within our own parties and also between parties, that everything is done to cater to one half of the country or the other. And we have this divisive protests in the street. He's not my president. Everybody's a Nazi. Hillary is Satan nonsense, which I think led to having two of the worst possible candidates running for office. We've got to stop it. And these guys that are now gloating should be talking more about how important it is that we take the lessons of being in the opposition party for the last 8 years and apply them here. He's the president and he's the leader of the Republican Party now. Hold his feet to the fire. You have no obligation to, like people say, can't you give him a chance? No, I can't. I don't need to, and I don't want to. What I want is to tell him that this is what he needs to do, and I want to yell at him and tell him he's doing it wrong every time I think he is. That's what we should do.
Yeah, and I worry for these formerly reluctant, now enthusiastic Trump backers, kind of what you touched on, which is that Donald Trump's unique capacity to destroy the conservative movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we'll see, the movement conservatives saw at the end of the George W. Bush tenure, our partisan affiliation and our partisan blindness caused us not to hold George W. Bush's feet to the fire on a couple of big issues. Medicare Part D being one of them, campaign finance reform that was an unconstitutional restriction on free speech that George W. Bush passed.
Right.
And for all of the heresies that we might say that conservatives went along with in the George W. Bush years, I think the risk of what Donald Trump could do to getting movement conservatives to basically sell out conservatism is 10 times worse.
Yes.
So I really worry about the conservative reluctant faction who are now enthusiastically pro-Trump, going along with some of these things that I think it will be anathema to what kind of conservative ideas and policy have been for a long time.
Well, you just have to look at the campaign to see that that's exactly what will happen. I mean, even the reluctant supporters, when the tapes came out, the tapes of him saying words that sounded very close to sexual assault. A lot of the reluctant supporters, they'd start out every tweet with, look, I'm not some Trump sycophant or whatever, but then they'd follow it up with, how do we know these are real? Why did they wait so long to bring them out? Who hasn't done this sort of thing? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And some of these people are leading in the evangelical movement. And it was hard it was hard to look at that. And I'm saying to myself, you do realize that you take the name Trump and you replace it with Clinton, and you're saying the same things that you pushed back against. Like you're now on the other side of the argument. And I will grant you the Democrats were on the other side of their argument. They were ready to accept things at face value and so on. There was no skepticism from either side about what they thought will benefit their political outcome. And that, to me, watching that, and not just that, there were other instances as well. Just look at Steve Bannon, who's connected to nationalist movements connected to the alt-right, which, people ask, what's so bad about the alt-right if it's just nationalist? I would say, by and large, most of the alt-right is just nationalist and not white nationalist. But the problem is they were more than happy to join forces with the white nationalists in order to achieve their goals. And so it's not just a matter of, there's some bad people in our midst. They're specifically catering to those groups and hoping for their support. And that's a problem. But so you look at a guy like Steve Bannon and his connections to the alt-right, and the people on our side of the aisle were saying, well, Huma had connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, as if that was some sort of a defense. They were basically saying that we had a problem with this with her, but so we can't have a problem with this with Bannon? I mean, it's ridiculous. But that's what they'll do, because that's what team sports make you do.
Yeah, I have just one more question, I think, for you. You were kind of on the Cruz side of things, right?
Yes.
In the primaries?
Mm-hmm.
So
although I voted for Rubio in South Carolina.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. How did you mentioned earlier on in this video kind of how we must resist giving even the politicians that we like the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
And I was someone who I kind of never liked Ted Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
I respected him for about 15 minutes after the Republican National Convention, and then that kind of fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
But how did as someone who was pro-Cruz and saw kind of his evolution as obviously a purely political actor through the primary and through the general election, how is your view of him and other, I would say, leading conservatives who did come around to the Trump side evolve?
I think some of those were the most disappointing, specifically because I knew that they felt as I did about Trump. I mean, Marco Rubio could barely get out of a press conference without people asking him if he was going to vote for Trump. And there was usually a combination of him mentioning that Trump having the nuclear codes is scary, combined with I'm going to vote for him. I think to some degree, I'm not sure about Cruz, but with Rubio, I've always thought to some degree he just thought Trump would lose. And so he was just like, let's just get through this and whatever. Yeah, fine, I'll support him, but he's not going to win anyway. I thought maybe that's what was going on, and he wasn't reading how dangerous it was to even lend that little bit of support. I think that these guys have a habit, a lot of these guys in Washington that I think are good people that have good intentions and really do genuinely want to shrink the size of government. I think that they have really complicated ideas about what they must put up with in order to get there. If you listen to Paul Ryan's rhetoric and try to square it with his TARP vote, that's pretty difficult to pull off. Same with Bush. I mean, the fact that he signed it into law. It's very hard to square that circle because everything that they have said has been in opposition to the idea that you should bail out private industry to the tune of almost $1 trillion. So I saw him being asked about this one time. And essentially what he said was, well, yeah, no, it is against everything that I believe. The problem was I needed something that would get us just to the next place. Not, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but basically what he was saying was, I knew we couldn't solve the problem now, but I also knew that if we did nothing, we wouldn't even get to the place we needed to get to in order to be able to solve it. Right. Which I understand, and I think that's what Cruz thought, and I think that's what Rubio thought. I think that they said to themselves, look, God forbid, if Trump does win, and I was on the other side of him, then I am no longer going to be that voice in the Senate that I think needs to be there. And while that may sound a little egotistical, which you have to be if you're a politician, it's also really, really short-sighted. I mean, people respect leadership, and they respect conviction, and they respect people who are willing to take risks, especially politicians who seem completely to throw caution to the wind when it comes to their career, which I think is so important. George Washington never wanted to be president. That's what we need. People who don't want the job, who find it to be a thankless job. It should be a thankless job. They should do it because they feel a sense of obligation, which is what I appreciated about Ben Sass and Evan McMullen. But yeah, they're disappointing, but I do think I will get to a point where I support them again. At least I support their reelection efforts. But I will treat them with the same level of scrutiny that I'm planning on treating Trump or anyone else.
All right, I think that's as good a place to end it as any. Thanks a lot for being with me today, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it.
And I will see everyone next time, another episode of Blogging Heads.